Lesson 1.2, transformations of linear and absolute value functions. In this very first page, it has all of the different transformations and translations that we have learned from lesson 1.1. We're just going to be summarizing. So if I wanted to move to the left, we looked at both absolute value functions and we looked at quadratic functions in lesson 1.1. If I wanted to move to the left in either one of these functions, I know that it needed to be an inside move, meaning I needed to see it inside the absolute value or inside of my parentheses. So it's inside the grouping symbol. Grouping symbol is a way of saying parenthesis or, a way of saying absolute value or parenthesis. So inside the grouping symbol. And if I wanted to move to the left, you know that you had to add. If I was moving to the right, you know that it's still inside of the grouping symbol, but you know that you had to subtract. So left and right are both inside moves. If it's on the inside and adding, then I'm moving to the left. If it's on the inside and subtracting, then I'm moving to the right. We learned this in lesson 1.1. Now what if I wanted to move up and down? Up and down were both outside moves. If I was on the outside and I wanted to move up, I needed to have an adding problem. If I was outside and I wanted to move down, I needed to have a subtract problem. So if I want to move up, on the outside, I needed to have something be added. If I wanted to move down, on the outside, I needed to have something subtracted. In lesson 1.1, we learned about reflecting across the x-axis. Reflecting across the x-axis was an outside move. And if you remember, it was on the outside, you were multiplying by a -1. So if reflect across the x-axis is an outside multiply by -1, we're going to hypothesize, and you are correct, that then reflecting across the y-axis would be an inside multiply by -1. We have not used this one yet. Today we will. So if I want to reflect across the x, it's an outside multiply by -1. If I want to reflect across the y, it's an inside multiply by -1. The last four transformations that we need to look at today are stretches and shrinks. And we can vertically stretch or shrink. We could also horizontally stretch and shrink. Verticals will be a review. Horizontals will be new today. So the quick review, if I was vertically stretching or vertically shrinking, we remember that this was an outside move. If I wanted to stretch, that meant I was going faster than original. So that meant that we were going to be multiplying by a factor. And if we were stretching, that factor needed to be larger than 1. If we needed to shrink, that meant we were going at a slower rate. We are still multiplying by a factor, but that factor needs to be less than 1, smaller than 1. So if I wanted to a vertical stretch or shrink on the outside, stretching meant my factor was going to be larger than 1. Shrinking on the outside needed to be multiplied by less than 1. So if verticals were outside moves, horizontals are going to be inside moves. Now we have to be very, very careful with this one. If I am horizontally wanting to stretch, we are going to multiply, but we're multiplying by a reciprocal. So reciprocal meant that you had to flip the fraction. So both of these are going to be multiplied by the reciprocal on the inside. Now if I wanted to stretch, the reciprocal that I give you needs to be smaller than 1. Now, why does that make sense? It's because if you took a number smaller than 1, let's pretend I took the number 1/2, and you gave me the reciprocal of it. The reciprocal of 1/2 is now 2. I am now stretching because it is now bigger than 1. Same for in here. If I wanted to shrink, my reciprocal needs to be larger than 1. Now, why does that make sense? Let's take a number, pretend it's 3. If I took the reciprocal of 3, I now have 1 over 3, which makes me shrinking. So you have to be very careful at your horizontals. These are going to be inside multiply moves, but they're multiplied by the reciprocals of what you are stating. So you're either smaller than 1 or you are larger than 1. So you just have to be careful.